Hello, welcome to episode number 70 of CXO-Talk. I am Michael Krigsman, and today is the Data Science Show. And I'm here with my glorious co-host, Vala Afshar.
Michael,
Vala,
how are you?
How are
Good
you?
to see you. Great.
You know, we do this handshake thing that nobody can see. That's why I was in favor of like these remote fist bumps, which you refuse to do. Okay. So Vala, we have a very interesting show today.
We have a fantastic show because not only we have one but two extraordinary data scientists who are here to talk to us about the importance of data-driven marketing. And with that, welcome Jeremy and Michael to CXO-Talk.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Jeremy Stanley is with Sailthrough. He is well, let him tell us your title, and Michael Wu is, again, I'll let him tell us his title with Lithium Technologies. Michael, let's start with you. So tell us about your title at Lithium and what you do.
So my title is the chief scientist. Basically, I don't know what that means, but in terms of what I do, you can think of me as a data scientist because I do crunch a lot of numbers to make sense of social data. The goal is, of course, to understand consumer behavior and understand the consumers in general. And but I also use other approaches, such as principle-driven based ways to kind of understand consumer. And a lot of those come from social science, such as behavioral economics, sociology, social psychology, anthropology, so on and so forth.
Can you talk about Lithium as well, a little bit about what Lithium does?
Yeah, so Lithium, we basically our goal is to help brands connect better with their customers, and we do this through three different ways. One is basically we have a agent to customer social response portal. So agents who's inside the company can respond to inquiries from their customer pretty much anywhere on social network. And another platform that we have is a community platform, which we basically help brands build these communities for their most passionate consumers and actually engage them deep enough so that they be enlisted and actually co-create with the brand. And then the third platform is basically the recently acquire the cloud platform. Basically, this is an acquisition engine that helps brands reach a much wider audience, more cost-effectively and efficiently, basically through the earned media that's generated by influencers.
And Jeremy Stanley, you are the chief data scientist at Sailthrough. So tell us what you do and what does Sailthrough do?
Sure. So I'll start with what Sailthrough does, because I think that's a little helpful background for what I do specifically. Sailthrough is a software as a service provider for both e-commerce companies and for publishers. And it's really all about marketing automation and personalization. And what I mean by that is the Sailthrough platform gives our clients the ability to communicate with their existing customers and do that in a very personalized way. So it could be through email, it could be through their mobile devices, in-app, or it could be on-site. It's a single integrated data profile about the consumer, and then a lot of automation to be able to use that data to give the consumer what they want when they want it. So as the chief data scientist, I lead a team that is focused on providing the intelligence in the platform. So it's around predicting user behavior on behalf of our customers. So what's this user most likely to do next? What product are they going to purchase? Are they likely to continue to want a given communication or not? And also optimization. So how do we improve the experience of the customer by optimizing when the messages are sent and in what channel they're sent, say on what device, and what the content of the messages are. So practically speaking, it's a mixture of algorithms, the data wrangling of not just Sailthrough data, but really it's all of the different clients that we have. We have all of their different data sets and schemas. And then the engineering to be able to take the algorithms and run them at scale to be able to make many millions of predictions or recommendations in very short time periods.
Great. So I think it was a McKinsey study that noted that by 2020, just in the U.S., we may have as much as 190,000 shortage in terms of data analysts and data scientists. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you become a data scientist? What's the path and the importance of the role in businesses today? Start with Michael.
So, well, first, I think that the term data scientist is actually pretty confusing because the way I see it is really three very different roles, and basically I kind of split them up into kind of according to the three layers of data processing. One is basically the foundational layer, is basically the infrastructure layer. And then these are basically, I think, what Jeremy referred to are the data engineers. And the next layer is basically the algorithm layer. These are people who are machine learning experts, apply statisticians. They build models and build algorithms and to predict something, right, or to make sense of something. And then lastly, we have the top level, the top layer, essentially that I call it the decision science layer. These are the people who are business analysts. They have the business context. They know how to interpret the data to help basically the business owner or the decision makers to make better decisions. So those are basically the three different kind of roles, that I see all kind of mash into one person, right? And I think that such a, if you call it a unicorn, such a unicorn probably do exist today, but I think that over time as the data science field become more and more mature, I think is probably people, is a tendency for people to specialize, so people actually may become more and more specialized into each one of these area than being a general jack of all trade. So in terms of how to become a data scientist, I would say that you certainly have to have some very fundamental, I would say, data skill, right? So data manipulation, SQL, and statistics, machine learning, all that. And you certainly need to have a good understanding of the business, have good communication skills. I think those are pretty obvious, but I think something that I see in a lot of good data scientists is the quality that's very important in good data scientists is that they also need to be somewhat curious. They have to be willing to essentially play with the data. They don't know, they may not know what they're going to find, but they're willing to play and experiment with it, and lots of perseverance, right? Because you don't know what you're going to find, right? So you kind of have to try and be persistent and persevere.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with everything that Michael said. I think it's very difficult to find people that have all of those three different types of skills, the software engineering or data hacking skills, the algorithms, the real science, and then the business side as well. Plus, you can have each of those things academically, but that's not enough to solve a problem in the real world. You need some art, some intuition, some experience in applying these tools and how you mix them together. So there are a couple of interesting challenges. One of them is how do you organize a team of people that maybe specialize in these three different areas such that they can work cohesively and solve a problem as a whole, versus trying to find data scientists that can do it all, because those are incredibly rare. And I think there's a variety of other educational challenges today. We're starting to address them. You see a lot of colleges now that have data science master's or PhD programs. There's also a lot of really interesting programs that are taking PhDs that have studied a quantitative discipline and decided they don't want to become an academic and they want to become a data scientist, and they will put them through a 6-week data science boot camp to get them out into the marketplace. So we're figuring out interesting ways of both on the supply side and in how you organize teams to tackle some of these shortages.
So for you then, it sounds like an important part of your job to accomplish what you need to do is to assemble the right team in place.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you want to start to scale things and support them and be able to tackle what often amounts to there's 100 problems that are really valuable that could have a high ROI at a data-driven organization that could be tackled with data science. And so the more you can scale a team and make them effective, the more value you'll be able to deliver. And figuring out how you assemble a team and how you recruit, how you ensure that you get people that are going to be effective is a really important challenge.
And are these teams, and Michael, jump in here too, but are these teams, you're talking about teams just of data scientists, or are there other disciplines, or what are you referring to?
Remember those 3 layers that I mentioned earlier, right? It basically so I think the industry is calling someone who could do all 3 a data scientist, right? And basically, since Harvard Business Review have dubbed data scientists as the sexiest job in 21st century, basically anybody who, I never know I could be sexy, but anyway, that basically created a lot of hype, and basically anyone who work with data in pretty much any capacity will want to call themselves a data scientist. And in some way, they're a little bit, they probably have skill in one of those 3 layers. They probably are working in the decision science layer, the algorithm layer, or the infrastructure layer. But it, like Jeremy said, it's actually rare, to have one person who does all 3. It's actually very expensive to actually look for one, that has all 3 of those skill, right? And it's actually much more cost effective to hire, I think, 3 people and actually make them work together. And it actually produces probably have higher throughput and more efficiency in the long run.
So Jeremy, what is the problem that you and your company trying to solve? Can you talk a little bit about how you're leveraging data to improve marketing and ability to influence a buyer?
Yeah. So the vision behind Sail-Through is pretty simple, that no 2 consumers should experience a brand in the same way. And we mean that very literally, that every interaction with a brand, in our case it's e-commerce companies or publishers, should be completely tailored to that individual. So it could be as simple as I have been on the site on my mobile device and I've read a bunch of content. If I go onto my computer and I'm at the same site, I shouldn't get recommendations for the content I just consumed, right? It should know that I had consumed that content. Or it could be more specific. If there's a catalog of 1,000 products, the offers that I get in a daily email of deals should be tailored to my past interests and past purchases. And increasingly that's possible to have that consolidated view across all of the different touch points. And so we make that possible. We store all of the data through APIs. And being able to just track the data alongside of our clients as a software as a service platform. And then we give them the tools to be able to customize all of those different touch points with the consumer.
But so it's interesting. So we're talking about personalization, and for personalization to be effective for an enterprise or business, you need to scale that. So there's some level of automation. But then how do you maintain that functional and emotional elements of personalization when you're using automation to scale? Seems like that's a pretty challenging problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and I think you have to decouple. Well, first you have to give up on the notion that the computer can come up with a message for you, right?
Shoot, marketing automation, isn't that?
Yeah, I mean it's an unrealistic expectation, and when people hear about data science or even worse, artificial intelligence, they start to jump to these conclusions that the computer can just do it all, and that's not true. It's not going to be true for a long time, I imagine. So rather, what we do is provide intelligence that you can integrate into messages or into content that you already have established. So if you have a template for interacting with a consumer in a specific channel, there might be a hero image in that template and a specific offer associated with that hero image. And we can select from your catalog of thousands of products the right one to put in front of the consumer at that point in time. We're not going to craft the prose that's next to it automatically.
But let me ask you guys something. So in the older days of marketing, and I think that the stereotype of this is the Mad Men TV show, right? In the older days of marketing, marketing was all about branding, and it was about spending money to buy advertising on television or magazines, and taking your clients out to lunch. So you develop those relationships, those buying relationships. Today, the model for marketing and advertising is completely turned on its head because of data. So maybe just give us the briefest history of how did we get to where we are, and what's the nature of marketing today and the connection with data, and it's very confusing for people. So what's going on? And then you have digital transformation to add another layer of confusion on top of it. So what's going on with data and marketing today?
You're throwing a lot of big words out there.
This is CXO-Talk. If you can't use big words.
So
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I won't tackle so much the history of it all, but there is one point there that I think is really important. That I don't think it's data versus branding.
Mm-hmm.
I think data is an accelerator for having an impact as a brand. It's that in anything. You can't stop interacting with people because you've got a HR system that's data driven, right? You still have to have the personal interactions. So in marketing, you still have to have the brand, but what data provides is a magnifier or a multiplier on top of your brand effect. So if you use data intelligently, you can stretch your brand dollars 50% further than your competitor. So that may not win the race. If your competitor has a brand that's twice as strong as yours, data may not make the difference. But 50% is an awful lot.
Different though. If you see the Obama campaign, so data actually could probably make quite a bit of difference.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Michael, you're one of the world's top expert in terms of social influence. Can you define influence and then tie data to influence in terms of your studies?
So the way I kind of like to look at influence is basically someone's ability to influence another person's thought or behavior, right? And so usually when you talk to people, who study influence, that's where the definition ends. But I like to take it a little bit more further because it actually matters how you change those people's thought or behavior. Because you could certainly, bribe them, right? That's not really influence because that's just a bribe, right? You could use force, right? So you can't really use any force, right? So and you really can't trick them either, right? Because some people do something or they think about something is because they don't know everything, the whole picture, and they be tricked to do it. So, and you also cannot frustrate them, right? Sometimes some people, you get so much email and spam, or that maybe it's your friend, they say, please help me share this, and sometimes you just say, okay, I really don't want to be bothered anymore. I'll just tweet it or I'll share it for you. Sometimes it's due to frustration, right? So you basically, I call this, you have to influence people's thought and behavior under this 4 conditions, right? There's no carrot, no sticks, no annoyance, and no trick, right? So you can't use money to bribe people. You can't use force, to coerce people into doing it. You can annoy people into doing it by frustrating them. You can't really trick them into doing it either. So that's how I look at influence.
And you're leveraging, and how do you leverage data to make sure there's no tricks and gifts and sticks and inconveniences?
Yeah, so that is actually a very challenging problem, right? So basically, with social media, actually not even in social media, in real life, the fact that we are interacting with each other means that we have the potential to influence another person, right? The fact that you're listening to me, you're talking to me, we're learning from each other. So I'm changing your thought, and in fact, I'm changing your thought about what data science is, what data science can do to help marketing, right? So that's changing. That's some form of influence, right? So that's so it happens in real life as people interact. But the thing is, when social media comes along, is that now a lot of these interaction happen digitally, and the thing about digital is that like they are typically generate a lot of data that's persistent. They basically are stored. And with those data, you can actually look for signals that indicates people's influence, right? It may not be very strong signals, but that's where machine learning comes in, right? All the machine learning will actually pick out, the most salient, most powerful, the strongest signal that indicates people's influence.
And Jeremy, so how is that similar to the thought process that you use when you are trying to make content more relevant and more personalized to consumers? What's the intersection?
Yeah, so rather than trying to tease out whether or not someone's influenceable or an influencer, we're trying to understand what are they most likely to do and how will they respond to a specific message. And I think I like the way that Michael framed it around the different ways that you can use social influence in a healthy environment and all the constraints. And it's one thing that's a principle for sail-through, and I think is a nice principle, is that we really want the result of all of this to be good for the consumer. We want the consumer to have a better experience. So I think in the past, a lot of data and a lot of marketing technology has been built to give the marketer what they want. And oftentimes marketers want things that drive up short-term metrics that they're closely focused on. And you're kind of providing them a machine gun, and they like shooting it, but maybe it isn't making consumers happier, right? Or building long-term relationships. So we focus on how do we make the consumer experience the brand in a way that they really want to experience it, and then they'll come back more often. So the right answer may be, you shouldn't message to this consumer. They don't want to hear from you. And that's a really important thing to learn from the data, that you should back away and stop communicating. In the end, how you get at that, like Michael said, there's a plethora of data, right? There's all of these different digital devices which are constantly emitting signals about a user's interest or intent, what products they're viewing, what products they're putting into their cart or abandoning, how they're talking about those products. All of that data can be collected, integrated in a single place. And then the question is, how do you sort the signal from the noise? With literally tens of thousands of data points about an individual consumer, how do you predict what they're going to do next? What product they might be most interested in? It's not something a human can do. You can't sift through and analyze 10,000 different variables on individual consumers. And so that's where you rely upon the machine learning algorithms. They're able to piece together all of that puzzle of data and say that you should weight all of these different factors in these different ways, and you get a prediction that isn't perfect, but it's far more accurate than guessing or a very rough human-driven segmentation approach would be.
Sure. So as a marketeer, as the CMO of Extreme, I'm always thinking about how we can better engage with our customers and partners and employees. And what we're doing right now, we're engaging. We're talking to each other. I'll follow you on Twitter, Michael. You'll follow me, and Jeremy, and so on and so forth. So I don't think engagement is hard, but sustained engagement, where we need to deepen relationships in order to, learn from each other and grow, that is difficult. So how do you use data and machine learning and algorithms to create an authentic relationship where we can maintain sustained engagement? And I'll start with Michael.
Yeah, so actually sustainability is a bulk of a lot of my work. A lot of my work focuses on strategy that help a company or brand be successful in the long term. And so, in fact, that very question that you asked, how do you make sustained engagement? How do you achieve sustained engagement is one of the problems that I analyze. And one of the key ingredient that we find from the data that we looked at is that somehow the strength of relationship is actually a very strong predictor. If you look at all the people that you engage with in a sustainable way, they're your friends, they're your colleagues, they're your business partners, or they have some relationship with you. That's actually a prerequisite. So that's the signal that we tease out through these machine learning and looking at lots of data. If you look at any one person that you engage with, you may not actually see that. It may not be very obvious that is the case. But if you look at millions and millions of engagement scenario, and then let your machine learning kind of comb through all those data, you find out, okay, well, there's actually some commonality in here that I don't see when I look at a smaller sample size, and that's essentially relationship, right? So that's that's one thing that we find. There may be other signals, but what we find is that, like, this one is actually very prominent. It's actually very I would say a very strong predictor, in the machine learning language for sustained engagement. Yeah.
Is this why companies are investing so much in building communities? Is that the power of the community is what helps create those strong relationships and bolster your social graph so that you can have that sustained engagement?
Sure, of course. I mean, that, if you look at it, so switching it from a different angle, right, rather than from a data science angle, from more sociology and anthropology perspective, in fact, humans have always built relationship through community, right? Because if you look at a definition of a community, what is a community? A community is really just a group of people that are held together by a common interest, right? It's that common interest that kind of bond you together, and then through interaction with people who have a common interest, you build relationship. And some examples, in your life could be, for example, like kindergarten or schools that you went to, right? Those are natural community, physical community that you spend time with, your friend and your classmates, and it is in those community that you build those weak ties into strong ties, and that's why they are sort of maintaining your Facebook connection today, right? So that's another way to look at it, a different approach, but from I would say more of a social science principle perspective, but equivalent. If there's one truth about how people behave, right? I mean, no matter what approach you take, they should come out, consistent. So
I want to remind everybody we're having a really interesting discussion with Michael Wu, who is the chief scientist at Lithium Technologies, and Jeremy Stanley, who is the chief data scientist, or did I reverse those titles, at SailThrough. And by the way, Jeremy, there's a comment from Twitter from Vijay Sankar, who is happy that SailThrough is a MongoDB customer. He works for MongoDB.
We're happy we're a MongoDB customer too.
So we have a MongoDB SailThrough Love Fest here.
Yeah.
But now what I'm really interested in finding out is, what can marketers and even people just on social media learn about influence and engagement from data science? Are there practical lessons that you can share for marketers?
What you want to learn. If you're trying to learn more about, which ad to serve is more effective, then Jeremy probably have an algorithm that would tell you which one is better, right? If you're trying to see, which one of your connection is most helpful in terms of helping you to spread your message, maybe the, my influence model would help with that, right? Depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So I would say that data science, there's lots of algorithm, but they're not always useful in all scenario, right? You still have to know what problem you're trying to attack.
Yeah, I think that I wanted to get back to this notion of how do you build a sustainable relationship with consumers, and I think that if you look at that problem as an interpersonal relationship, we all know that interpersonal relationships are built on a two-way exchange, right? Listening to what the other person is saying. And if you're a small business owner you can have that two-way interchange with all of your consumers. But if you're an e-commerce platform or you start to become a larger enterprise, you can't possibly sustain that, right? And so what happens is companies stop listening. They start to divide their customer base and simplify things into personas, and then communicate with that persona. And then you as a consumer are lumped in with another 100,000 people, and you no longer feel like the company is listening to you anymore. And I think that's when the relationship breaks down. And I think that's why personalization is so powerful and data science can be so powerful, is because it can give you the ability to continue to have that personal interchange of information and listening to the person on the other side across millions of consumers. You know, think about if you use Netflix, if you use Google, if you use Amazon, you feel like you have a relationship as an individual with those companies because of the data exchange that's going back and forth and how their services are dynamic.
Sure. So you know, when we talk about marketing automation, and I think about your traditional customer acquisition funnel, and you know, whether it's using IDC or Cirrus Decision or whatever standard that you're following, typically there's 6 or 7 layers from where you put the name in the funnel and you become engaged prospect, and MQL, SQL, opportunity of the customer. And as you're going through that buyer's journey and you're capturing these names, there's all this social activity that's taking place. And in most systems, there's a lack of contextual intelligence in terms of all of the conversations and activities that are taking place with that particular name inside the funnel. And as you're transitioning through these stages, are there solutions today where we can leverage data science to personalize the delivery of the content that most companies have, where they're trying to nurture the lead along the buyer's journey, but they have absolutely no visibility in terms of the social activity? Is this something that data scientists in your organizations are looking to potentially solve, or do solutions exist today to deliver that type of insight to marketeers?
So, Michael, I don't know if you want to take this one first, since social is right up your alley. I can talk about it more from the advertising technology landscape.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think the main challenge there is when you're dealing with people that are high up in the funnel. It's very difficult to identify that individual consistently across many different channels. And I think there are companies that are trying to solve that problem. How do you build a unified view of that individual long before they ever sign up for your site or make their first transaction? You know, any of those personal relationships.
Sure.
But that's still an open problem. I think there are also a lot of challenges around understanding the semantics of everything that's happening in the social arena. It's very difficult to infer from Twitter, 140 lines of character, whether or not someone's being sarcastic or realistic, right? That's a machine learning problem that's still very difficult.
A unified profile, I think that is going to be a combination of both data as well as I would say strategy. You know, so one thing that a company that we acquired recently, Cloud, does really well is that they actually make consumer want to opt in their data, right? Because when you opt in more data, they could essentially have the algorithm can actually come through more data to pick out potential signal to indicate that your influence, right? And therefore, essentially, it boosts their influence. So you actually create a strategy that makes consumer actually want to share more of data with you, right? And in fact, that actually solved a very challenging machine learning problem, right? This is what we call the entity disambiguation problem, right? It basically cross-channel and identities are very difficult to link or disambiguate, right? Because I mean, for example, Michael Wu is actually a very common name. There are probably 50 or 100 other Michael Wus out there, and how do you know which one is me and which one is not? That's actually very challenging. But if I actually have a service that could quantify my influence, and I want to, the more data that I opt in, the more data for them to crunch through, so it essentially help me build my influence more accurately, then I will want to tell them that, okay, this is my Twitter data, this is my LinkedIn data, this is my. So essentially, you have the user essentially declare, help you solve the problem. They declare they help you disambiguate these entities.
Sure.
We have a question from Twitter and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Boris Ball, who asks, what do you think are the key technologies regarding data science in the near future?
So I have a strong opinion on that. There is a platform called Spark that has grown dramatically over the past couple of years. It came out of Berkeley. They have a BDAS center that has released a lot of really interesting technologies. And Spark is, there was just the Spark Summit 2014 out on the West Coast. And what's really interesting about it is a couple of things. One, it's storing all of the data in memory. And most traditional systems for working with data have to cache data on disk regularly. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you do it thousands of times, very slow operation, all of a sudden you can't complete a computation in a day, let alone in an hour and a minute. And so by having, literally we have, at times 20, 40 terabytes of data in memory in a distributed system, and can run algorithms on top of that data. It's very, very powerful. And the ecosystem is rallying around it. So there are people building graph databases on it and machine learning libraries on top of it. And it's the first time I'm seeing a lot of the really big data processing engineering community that surrounded Hadoop and the data science communities that were surrounding things like R or Python really coming together into a single platform that can be run distributed on really big data sets where code can be written really quickly and you can get answers back quickly. So I think it's going to be really transformational over the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow. And Michael, any thoughts on the technologies?
That's cool.
Well, I'm very technology agnostic. I used everything from R to Hive, and so I think mainly open source stacks. So yeah, I would say that I think the open source technologies will probably stick around, and they're probably more joining the ecosystem. But that's probably what I would have to say.
Yeah, open source is incredibly important. I frequently will not even consider candidates that don't use open source tools. It suggests they're not on the edge, they're not open to what's happening in the open source communities. To be able to piggyback on the tens of thousands of really smart people out there contributing to these platforms on a daily basis is an incredibly powerful resource.
Question to you, Jeremy. Many of the marketeers that I engage with are struggling with developing a converged content strategy of paid, owned, and earned. And in our space, in the B2B technology space, I feel that the buyer, the CIO or CDO, is more influenced by content, more and more influenced by content than advertising. So what's your advice to marketeers, digital marketeers, and marketing organizations that have data analysts and scientists in terms of how you can leverage data to improve the quality of your content so you can influence a buyer?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of subtleties around that question. There's the rise of native advertising as well, which is another really interesting trend, and something I think will continue to grow as long as it's transparent. But I think more importantly, to optimize content, you have to test it. And I think that's something that sometimes in data science we forget. We think that because we can collect all of this data, we can divine answers, when oftentimes we're divining correlations and not causation. And so if you have a content strategy, the very best way to do this is to test multiple different content simultaneously and to be able to rigorously measure whether or not people are responding.
That makes sense.
What about the ethical aspects? How do you avoid the appearance of being creepy when you start aggregating this data and making predictions and so forth? And there's many cases of it. So how do you avoid being creepy?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is to have basically you need to have some governance, right? And I think a good governance would be like always default opt out, and user can opt in anytime and opt out anytime, right? So you create a default that's opt out that basically, so if when they opt in, they know, right? So people know what they're getting into, and the data is being used in certain way to maybe benefit, provide better services for them or whatever, right? And also they could opt out anytime, right? So if they decided that this is actually not that useful, then they could leave and stop sharing the data with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Michael, we're amongst friends. You know, I'm not sure if anybody else is watching, so we're just going to ask you, how can I improve my cloud score? No. The question is, let's not make it about me. You know, how do we improve? How can someone improve their social influence? You know, using social media or communities or other platforms. And if you want to give us, you know, the secret to the cloud algorithm,
well,
that's okay
that's
too.
Right. That's just between us.
Just between us.
And we'll even cover our ears.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I have built a influence model. I think probably 3-4 years back now, and that model basically has 6 factors, and basically it's credibility, bandwidth, and then relevance in terms of informational relevance, the content relevance, and then there's timing, and then channel alignment, and then trust. These are the 6 factors. They all have to be present in order for someone's influence to propagate. You know, so those are if those were the 6 factors that essentially the machine learned, right? It looked at thousands of variables, and then it picked out these 6 to be the most important ones, and then those are the ones that you should focus on. I guess, you know, the thing is, you know, build your credibility, right? Maybe through community or through your social presence, right? Have some bandwidth, right? You need to share, you need to talk, right? If you have credibility but you don't actually share anything on social media, then nobody's going to know, right? And be relevant, right? The third factor is information relevance. So share relevant content. Don't share things that are irrelevant. And the fourth factor is timing. That's just another dimension in relevance. It's basically what we call temporal relevance, right? So it had to be relevant in the time domain as well. And then the fifth factor just means your channel has to align. So it's basically location relevance. You could think of it like that. And then trust is basically be trustworthy, right? So one of the things that we find that builds trust is basically transparency. Right? So if you more transparent you can be, and more authentic you can be, the more trust you build, right? So those are the things that's in my old model. That's not the algorithm that cloud currently uses, but you know, we are working together to integrate the two company. We just acquired them not too long ago, so there's still a lot of work to be done.
Are these in order? Are these is for example credibility the most important element?
No, in fact, the interesting thing about this model is that like no one of them is actually more important than the other. The interesting thing about this model is that you have to have all six, right? If you are credible, but you don't have any bandwidth, you don't talk, right? Then you're not going to be able to influence anyone, right? Same thing. Like if you pick any one of the four and say you eliminate that, right? So you're credible, you have bandwidth, say your content is perfectly relevant, but you don't have temporal relevance. It arrived at a really bad time, and that people just ignore it, right? Then you're not going to influence people, right? Same thing as, you know, if you have everything but trust, right? I mean, say you may have all the credibility, bandwidth, and everything is perfect. You're speaking in the right channel, but if someone just don't trust you, then you can't influence them either, right? So you have to have pretty much all six of these. So they all are I would say each necessary, but each alone is not sufficient. You need to have all six. So
it's interesting. That's kind of a very common pattern where oftentimes things are what we call multiplicative. You have to multiply things together in order to get the final outcome, and it's often, you know, back to things that marketers can learn. It's easy for humans to think in more additive terms. I just need to add a little bit more of this and things will go up proportionately, where maybe there's one key ingredient that's missing and it doesn't matter at all because it's really a multiplicative process.
That's fascinating.
Well, we're just about out of
Everything is-
time, and so how about just each of you just to end, each of you very briefly describe where you see your part of the data science world going. So, Jeremy, you want to start? What's next for the type of data science that you're working on in your particular domain?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One of them is this promise of omni-channel, being able to have the consolidated view of the consumer across not only all of the different digital touch points, which we do today, but also the physical touch points. With mobile devices, with people opting in through apps, and increasingly retailers experimenting with models, I don't think we're too far away from a world where if a consumer opts in, they can share a consistent profile and get discounts and have a store be cognizant of what they've done online and vice versa. I think that the other interesting dimension to this is really the improvement of the algorithms themselves and the measurement of the results. So we're still, I think, in very early days at being able to measure the impact on people of what we do. What's the long-term incremental impact? How is someone really influenced and changed over their lifetime because of actions that we take? And so as we continue to get better and better at measuring it at scale, I think we'll get better and better at optimizing algorithms to influence people for the better.
Okay, and Michael, what's next for online for measuring influence?
Okay, I would say that what's next is not necessarily measuring influence, but actually understanding of the customer, and that's actually, I would say, I would think it's much more interesting, in a way that there are actually a lot of signals that's hidden in the social data that we kind of leave behind as we participate in social media. So we leave behind a lot of data, and within those data there are signals that tell us something about that person, which not necessarily we don't necessarily declare. Like for example, like if you don't have a picture, you just send a tweet, right? Maybe there are some signals in those tweets, the language that you use, that could tell your age, your gender, your educational background, right? So there are things that I would say that you could pick out, like from those telltale signals from the data that you leave behind, that allow you to understand the consumer much, much better, and which is actually very important when it comes to both influence and as well as ad optimization, because this comes to basically the question of relevance, right? Remember, relevance is actually one of the factors in my early influence model, right? The way to get a relevance is to really understand the person, right? You have to know the person to understand what's relevant for him, right? So, and that's, I think, similar for serving effective ads and content.
So for both of you then, ultimately, understanding the consumer is like a driving force underlying the work that you're both doing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, most of my algorithms and also my more principled, way through the social science is to try to understand consumer behavior.
Yeah, a long time ago when I was 17, I applied for a research experience at Cornell, and I was studying math, and they asked me to write a paper about what I wanted to do with math, and I said I wanted to predict people's behavior, and that's exactly what we do.
That's amazing.
Okay, well, we're out of time. I wish we could continue this. You guys are a wealth of information.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And as I listen to both Jeremy and Michael, I think about the near future in marketing, and I find it hard to imagine that marketing new hires will not have technical backgrounds. Mm-hmm. I think whether you call them data scientists, data analysts, I believe this is going to be the most important new hire into marketing organizations, because unless you understand your customer and the buying behavior, I'm not really sure how you can have meaningful marketing for your business. So fascinating. Thank you very much, both of you. It's we could have easily talked for another couple of hours.
Yeah, you know what was interesting to me is that they're both talking about using data for the benefit of the consumer.
Yeah.
And you know, when we think about data, I tend to think about Facebook and the relationship that Facebook has to its customers. And is there anybody that thinks of Facebook as being benevolent and wanting to use data to the benefit of the customer? It's all about to the benefit of Facebook. And so I thought that view of how do we use data from the point of view of the consumer actually is a great message.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Jeremy, Michael. Incredible insight, and look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both.
So you've been watching CXO-Talk. This is episode number 70, and we've been talking with Michael Wu from Lithium Technologies and Jeremy Stanley from Sailthrough, two data scientists, and with my friendly co-host, Vala Afshar. Vala?
Yeah, friendly and now data-driven
And
co-host.
data-driven, friendly and data-driven co-host, Vala Afshar. Okay, and I hope you'll come back next week. Our next show is going to be another interesting one with the Chief Information Officer for McAfee. And that'll be an interesting show as well. So thanks so much, and I hope everybody has a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.